Today, in a special bonus episode of the Digital HR Leaders podcast, I'm delighted to welcome my Insight 222 colleagues, Jonathan Ferrar and Naomi Verghese, to the show. Welcome to the show, Jonathan and Naomi. Let's start with what brought you both into the world of people analytics, and maybe more importantly for our listeners, why did you decide to dedicate the last few years to researching the field? So, Jonathan, I'll start with you because I know you've been in the field for over 15 years.
Yeah, well, firstly, David, thank you very much for this, having us on a podcast. It's not normal to have our own team on the podcast, so I really appreciate that. And very, very excited to be here with Naomi to talk about research that we've been doing in the field for the last 5 years. I grew up, I guess, as a scientist in the clinical trials area in pharmacology. I always had an interest in research generally, in that case in the pharmaceutical bioscience area, and spent the first few years of my, I suppose, post-education life, looking at actually cancer and things like that. So I had always a passion for science. Then from a business perspective, I got into the business world. I really loved it. I loved human resources, went through a variety of roles over many, many years. And then in early 2010, got asked if I would lead IBM's, what was then new workforce analytics function. And that was my intro into the people analytics space. But sort of funny story, I guess, is that, I asked after I'd plucked up the courage after a few months, I said, well, why did you choose me? There's 130 executives in HR in IBM. And, why did you choose me? And they said, we think you're the most scientific of our HR executive group. And then it sort of clicked that clearly things that I'd learned in my education background in clinical trials probably had sort of seeped through in conversations and knowledge and maybe the way that I worked. And therefore, I brought together both my passion for people and human resources, but my passion for science as well. And that's what got me into the people analytics space, very fledgling at the time. And then, I got really hooked on it and how human resources can bring evidence into the conversation, as well as other things, but, really build the evidence-based future of the function. And I just got really, really attracted to the topic and made it my life, basically. And sort of the last 15 years, and that's it.
That's brilliant. And then, of course, we met at IBM. Listeners may not know that. Jonathan hired me at IBM. And then soon after, along with others, we set up Insight 222 back in 2017.
Shall I reveal that story, David? That might be an interesting one for this podcast.
Go on then.
Because people don't know this. So very quick, we'll do it in less than 60 seconds. But back in 2014, David revealed one of his very famous LinkedIn posts about, the best of this, best of that. And in those days, it was very fledgling, but David revealed a list which is called the best, or the top 50 people in people analytics. I don't think we called it people analytics at the time, but anyway. And I was on this list, and I was working in New York at the time. David was in London, so he sent this out on an early morning. And then I woke up, a few hours later, and my LinkedIn feed was, full of all these sort of congratulating. What on earth is this? And David, of course, tracks a lot of attention. And I got, I found my way to this article, and then it was like, whoa, who is this person? So I sent David a note, said, hey, who are you? What are you? Let's meet up. Next time I was in London a few weeks later, we met up. I think it was February 2015. And then, we sort of got in conversation, said we should probably work together, and the rest is history. And we've been working pretty much together ever since. So that's how we met.
Good story. And then a few years into our journey at Insight 222, Naomi, you came on board, Naomi Verghese. So Naomi, would you like to sort of introduce yourself and your background in the field as well, please?
Yes, and to echo Jonathan, David, thank you very much for having us on the podcast. It's a real privilege and a bit different to be talking with you in this way. But yeah, so our listeners know my background. If I'm really honest, I stumbled into HR. It was a bit opportunistic at the start of my career, but I've always been drawn to analytical roles in HR, although at that point in my career, people analytics as it exists today, didn't exist. So I always looked for opportunities to do analytics roles in whatever form or department they came. I also spent 3 years working in the business. So virtually all of my career before Insight 222 is in financial services, and most of that at Barclays Bank. So I spent a few years deepening analytical skills, working in a commercial team, looking at products and sales development and how the business runs. Following that, I moved back into HR and did a series of chief of staff roles for HR directors. And again, those always had an analytical component. And maybe to the frustration of my bosses, I was always more drawn to that side than some of the other responsibilities of the job. And then in 2016, 2017 at Barclays, we embarked on a really exciting transformation journey in HR. A people analytics function was set up. We set up a chief data office in HR, and we also set up a technology partnership and made some really serious investments in technology. It was a very exciting time in HR in the company, and I really wanted to be part of that rather than doing analytics off the side of the desk. So I moved over into people analytics, worked for a fantastic leader there, was part of a leadership team that was building people analytics. So I got to do all sorts of different roles. I was a product owner for our early democratization solutions. I partnered with our governance lead to set up all of the governance for people analytics, hired some of the first data scientists. And then the role I eventually settled on was leading the consulting team. So if anyone's not sure what that means, that's having a number of people analytics partners that partner with HR and the business and act as that bridge between the technical expertise of the people analytics team and the needs of the business. Conceptually, it's a little bit similar to an HR business partner role, but in the context of people analytics. I really enjoyed helping Barclays on that transformation journey. And then an opportunity came up to join Insight 222 and to do that on a much bigger scale and help a large number of organizations through everything that Insight 222 does and across a wide number of industries as well. So that's what brought me into Insight 222. I have a researching background, an analytical background, like I mentioned. So, I naturally gravitated towards research. And what we really aim to do with our research at Insight 222 is help the HR profession put people analytics at the centre of business. So that's essentially what we're trying to do.
Thanks, Naomi. So at Insight 222, we refer to leading companies in our research. For clarity, what are leading companies? And from the research, what do leading companies do differently when it comes to people analytics, Jonathan?
We've been looking at the topic of what do the best of the best do for years. I mean, David, when you and I first started talking about, even before we set up Insight 222, we always had this fascination with what is it that the best companies in people analytics, those that display the best outcomes or that deliver the best outcomes, what is it that they actually do? So over the last few years, and this is really why we got into research, was can we research deep into the field, deep into the companies, deep into those organizations that do people analytics and really try and isolate those factors that make the best companies stand out? What are those factors? So the term leading companies is short for leading companies in people analytics. We don't mean leading companies in, market capitalization or share price or things like that. We mean leading companies in people analytics. And what we have looked at over the last 5 years since we've been doing research deeply in the people analytics space is trying to isolate those factors. So we started off with some fairly general sort of, companies do various things. We know that they deliver value. We know that they create impact. We know that they basically have a people analytics leader that's very proficient, that the CHRO supports people analytics and things like that. And then we sort of got a little bit deeper into looking at maturity models. And then we came up with what we termed the 9 dimensions for excellence in people analytics, which was talked about a lot in Excellence in People Analytics, the book. There's 9 dimensions that companies generally do. And we looked at those, and there were essentially 3 elements to each of those 9, so 27 elements and things like that. And then we narrowed it down, and we started looking at different data points with Naomi's real expert help on the research side. In 2022, we came up with this model called Leading Companies in People Analytics, and then we refined it in 23. By then, the data set's getting bigger. In 24, the data set was 348 companies, so we could really isolate things, and we came down to 8 very specific things that leading companies do. And there are very, very discrete things. So when the first one is influence, the people analytics leader of the function called people analytics has great influence at the C-suite. And what do we mean by that? Very specifically, they have a relationship with the CEO, at least to meet with that person once a year. For example, there are very, very specific things that they do. But what that means is, and it doesn't mean to say that, oh gosh, you just got to know the CEO. Well, how many people in a company really know the CEO? But what it means is that the gap between where the people analytics leader is operating and where the CEO is, that gap is short enough and small enough that a relationship can be built so that the people analytics leader can directly influence the top and listen to the top and understand the impact of actions on outcome and therefore link those things together so that strategically the people analytics team is focused on delivering outcomes that are linked to the biggest corporate objectives, which is clearly what the CEO operates at. And there are 7 other things, having great prioritization, business prioritization, having very key skills, data scientists, behavioral scientists and consultants, having a very clear governance and ethics, particularly around how data is used and governed in the employee space. So they're 4 things, and then 5 on value, measuring the success and outcomes of people analytics solutions, democratizing data to managers and HR professionals, and getting adoption of that democratization. Personalizing solutions is the 7th, not just creating nice insights, but actually bringing those to personalization to the employees, managers, and executives, and then creating a data-driven culture across HR by influencing and building data literacy. So they're the 8 very specific things. There's detail behind them. We can get into that, but that's the exciting part of what we do when we talk about leading companies.
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan. And actually, we're going to dig into some of those characteristics a little bit deeper throughout the rest of the conversation. And Naomi, let's turn to the most recent People Analytics Trend Report. That's the 5th one, I think. So we started in 2020. And we found in this time some findings around AI and the democratization of people data. And as you said with Jonathan, that democratization to adoption element as well. There were 2 of the top findings in this year's report, and they're linked to business value. Can you speak more on these trends and how they're influencing the adoption and growth of people analytics in organizations today?
Yes, absolutely, David. So let's start with AI. So firstly, AI is not new for us in people analytics. But what has happened and what's affected everyone is generative AI's breakthrough year in 2023 with the release of ChatGPT. What happened there, which everyone knows about now, is it created a lot of hype and a lot of reaction and interest and concerns in organizations all the way up to the C-suite and board. And what we saw from the clients that we work with at Insight 222, so the people analytics leaders that we partner with, their CHROs turned to them and said, what does this mean for us? What does this mean for us in HR? What's everyone else doing? What should we be thinking about? What should we be concerned about? What does this mean? And so this has really been changing, like many things have, the role of the people analytics leader in the last year or so. There's a lot more as AI goes up the agenda in terms of businesses, or accelerates, let's say, the journey it was already on. there's a lot more opportunities for people analytics to now partner with cross-functional teams in the organization. So enterprise analytics teams, enterprise data and AI teams, because in order to scale AI initiatives, those partnerships are really important. And HR is, joining part of the organization in terms of solving what are the most valuable use cases, what will the return on that investment be, what should the prioritization be, and where should the investments be made. So it's really kind of the focus of a lot of teams. And then, of course, as well as all of the ethical considerations that our teams are working through, many are looking at how they can really solidify and invest in the data foundations, because without good data quality, data processes and flows, without that in place, without that investment in the data infrastructure, they know they won't be able to maximize the opportunities that AI presents. So that's really important as well. And we know a lot of organizations in HR are working on that as well. And then it's really the opportunities that AI presents to really get into more personalization, so more personalized solutions for employees that result ultimately in a better employee experience. That's the opportunity, but of course, it has to be done in the right way. And then that dovetails quite nicely into democratization. So what we mean by democratization is the way that analytics and insights get into the hands of users. Your most common democratization solution is a dashboard, but of course there's many more products and solutions beyond that. But there's a real challenge facing our field at the moment. So we in people analytics have become very good at developing products. We've really become good at that over the years. But where we need to focus on and where we are not so good at is driving the adoption of those products by the users. And David, there's a fantastic podcast interview that you did with Phil Wilburn, who's the head of people analytics at Workday, and he really talks to this, what he calls crises of adoption. And this is a really, really important area for us to focus on. It encompasses lots of things. It's about having a user-centric design in the first place. It's about personalized solutions, not just one size fits all. And it's about getting the insights into the hands of users, so managers, employees, leaders, HR colleagues, right at the point where they need that data to make the decision. That's the challenging part. It's not just about rolling out a tool and then you're done. And then, of course, it's all of the change management that goes around driving the adoption. So the communications, the internal marketing, selling the what's in it for me in terms of the user. Why should I use this product? Establishing champions. And like I mentioned, really baking it into how employees get work done and how the business runs. When you're delivering products to employees, managers and leaders outside of HR, then, adoption's even more challenging. You've got a much bigger audience to grasp with all sorts of varieties of needs and backgrounds. At our Insight 222 peer meeting in Copenhagen a couple of years ago, one of our clients summed it up perfectly. They were looking at a solution for employees, and they learned that the finished product is just the beginning. And I think that really sums up the importance of focusing on adoption really well.
Yeah. And actually it's interesting, isn't it? Because in the research, and correct me if I get the numbers wrong, I think of the 348 companies, 71% said they had democratized data and insights and products out to the business, out to HR business partners. I think it was only 47% said they had a high adoption within HR, and it was 20-something% that had a high adoption in the business. So there's a big gap for many people analytics teams to close there. And I think what's interesting with the research that we do, we see that with the companies that we work with as part of the people analytics program as well, which is nice to see the kind of validation of the research insights that you and the team are finding. And also, a number of the team are recent heads of people analytics as well. So again, it resonates with some of the challenges that they were facing in their companies as well.
Yeah, just to add what you said there about the gap, we've started to call that gap between the percentage of companies rolling out these products and solutions and the percentage of users that are actually adopting them. You shared the percentages there, and there's that clear gap. We've started to call that gap leakage. So that's what we refer to as leakage and adoption. You may have a relatively high number of companies rolling products out, but actually the percentage that are getting adopted to the level that they would want is a lot lower. And so in people analytics, we really need to focus on closing that gap. And the only way to do that is to really focus on this adoption challenge.
What Naomi has just highlighted there is one of the big challenges for analytics, and for people analytics specifically, is for many years, I would say, I've been in it for 15 years, as we mentioned earlier, but for 10 of those years, I would say 10 or 12 of those years, the effort was on activity. How much are we doing? Are we creating models? Are we doing advanced analytics? Are we getting analytics in the hands of executives, managers, HR business partners? But now the topic of conversation should be, and is starting to be, about adoption. Are people using things? Are we creating products? Are we creating products that people are using to advance business? Are we delivering value? So that leakage that Naomi talks about is so important, because if your leakage is high, you're doing a lot but not getting much value. If your leakage is low, what you're doing is creating value. And that's the key about leakage. It's about how much of what you do is getting results and outcomes.
Obviously, Naomi, you also talked about AI as well, bit of the topic du jour at the moment. And as you said, the introduction of generative AI did seem to act as a bit of a catalyst in HR. I think one of the findings in the research was that 62% of the companies said they were in the first year of their journey of AI in HR, which does suggest that could have been the case. So, in terms of, maybe can we share an example with listeners of how leading companies are effectively leveraging AI in people analytics? So Naomi, why don't we start with you, because I know you've got a good example.
Yeah, so there's lots of examples out there, and actually what we're trying to do at Insight 222 is really surface these use cases with some of these companies that are a bit further ahead in HR on their journey, because it's really useful for everyone else to see what the art of the possible is. But one that comes to mind is HSBC. So we partner really closely with HSBC, and they were very kind enough to share this use case on a webinar we delivered last year. But what the team there are doing is they're working with a chatbot. So their chatbot is called Ada, and the role of Ada is to scale insights to the organization. So it leverages generative AI, and what you can do is you can go into Ada and type questions. So for example, I might say, tell me how many employees there are in marketing in Singapore, and Ada will provide me the number. Maybe that's 1,000. And all sorts of other things there. So some of those data and insights that you typically get in a dashboard, all of your employee demographics and other metrics that leaders and managers and HR colleagues need on a day-to-day basis. They're able to get those through Ada. And what Ada is really helping the organisation to achieve, and what the people analytics team driving this, is it's scaling insights on a much greater scale. And of course, that's what AI enables. It's also accelerating the speed at which colleagues can access those insights as well. It's a lot easier to type it into a chatbot and get an answer back instantly, rather than going into a dashboard to find it yourself. And it also increases the personalization they're able to get as well, because of course for each employee, Ada knows what business unit they're in, what data they should and shouldn't have access to, and all of that gets configured in the back end. So it's been really exciting to hear from the team at HSBC about what they've developed and their future plans for Ada as well.
Very good. Jonathan, any examples that particularly resonate with you?
Yeah, the example that I love, and I only found out about this in the last year when we were doing the trends research in 2024, is an example from Schneider Electric. They created what was called a fair pay simulator. So essentially, global pay equity or pay equity in certain countries is a very important topic in organizations. And there are regulations and guidelines for declaring pay equity in certain countries as well. So many companies look at this, but I think what Schneider Electric did that was interesting, they undertook advanced analytics to try and work out models that could look at variances in pay between gender and looking at different options that exist, when you're constructing compensation packages and things like that. And they pulled all that together in models. Models in analytics has been around for decades, but what they did was they then added that into using AI, pulled it together into an app, which they call the Fair Pay Simulator. And what this app does effectively is gives users the possibility to simulate total compensation packages with various parameters, when they're looking at creating compensation packages for individuals, but utilizing in the background all of the data that exists around compensation across gender equity positions, and also looks at what the goals are of the organization. So it starts recommending and giving suggestions for pay decisions, but based on real simulated options which align with the organization's goals. And I think what I love about this is that Schneider Electric created an AI hub across the organization back in 2021, before the hype of AI, using a lot of the skills that they had. And it just goes to show that at an enterprise level, if you get your alignment right around these topics, that you can build some very, very powerful simulators and apps to help organizations achieve goals. But this one strikes me because it not only helps an organization do things better, but it's a society challenge as well. And it's helping, in its way, it's helping society in the communities in which Schneider Electric operates.
Very good. Very powerful example. And actually, for those that want to read more about that, there is a case study actually in the People Analytics Trends report, and we'll provide the link to that in the show notes. We've had several great examples on the podcast over the last year. Michael Vaccaro from MasterCard was talking about how they're using AI to support some of the work they're doing around leadership development, what they're doing around powering their skills-based organization. I've just recorded an episode which will come out in a few weeks with Annie Dean at Atlassian. They're really using AI and to change the way how they work at the company. And then a great example with Nicole Lemeroux, the Chief HR Officer at IBM. They're using an agent called Hero that supports the HR business partner in the quarterly promotion cycle, working with obviously the people manager. It does most of the administrative tasks that the HR business partner was having to do themselves beforehand. They've managed to reduce the number of weeks that cycle takes now from 10 weeks to 5, and they've saved around 50,000 hours a year. And those are 50,000 hours that HR professionals can be using for more strategic work than bringing data sets together and organizing meetings. So I think we're only at the early stage of seeing this, and obviously what we're seeing is people analytics teams are at the forefront of this work to help AI embed within some of the HR processes and work that we're doing in companies. Moving on to Jonathan, this one's for you around, again, looking at leading companies again. So one of the characteristics of leading companies that they invest in building data literacy throughout HR. That was the 8th characteristic that you mentioned earlier. And that is as part of building that data-driven culture. I know this is something that you actually worked on all the way back when you were at IBM running people analytics there as well. Why do you think this is so crucial? And what are the biggest challenges that you find organizations face in achieving this?
You're right, David. I've been working on this for years. Back in IBM, we introduced 2 programs. One, and just to put it in context, there were about 1,000 HR business partners in IBM at that time. and about 5,000 or so HR professionals in total. The things that we did at IBM, we did two programs. We did a very, very deep analytics. It was a 3-day workshop. About 100 people went through. It was people in centers of excellence predominantly who needed to improve their skills in analytical methodologies. And so we ran case studies and simulations in that 3-day workshop and really built people's analytical skills. A lot of it was around models and statistics and visualizations. And we did another thing as well, which was a light touch. It was in those days called e-learning. I mean, we call digital learning now, but effectively it was a sort of 2-hour package around helping HR professionals of all levels and all disciplines to just elevate their language, their knowledge, and things like that.
So one of the characteristics of leading companies, you mentioned it, Jonathan, it's the 8th characteristic, is creating a data-driven HR function, building data culture and building data literacy. Why do you think this is so crucial? You've been in the field for 15 years. I know it was something you looked at IBM. Why is data literacy so crucial across HR, and what are some of the biggest challenges organizations face in achieving this?
Yeah, it's really a good question. A bit of background. You mentioned I'd been involved in this back in my IBM days. We looked at two different types of upskilling. One was a more detailed 3-day education course around analytics for key people. Often it was people in COEs, in HR COEs, who wanted deeper analytical and statistical awareness and knowledge and skills. So we did run simulations and case studies around statistics, methodologies, analytical techniques, analyzing data and visualizations. The other was a broader educational offering to HR people generally. I mean, in those days, IBM had about 5,000 HR professionals, about 1,000 HR business partners. So we had to try and reach people in, about 150 odd countries around the world. And what we did was like a 2-hour short e-learning package around benefits of analytics, case studies, asking business questions, more general analytical topics. And what we found was through the people that they loved demystifying analytics. Everyone thought it was about statistics, and actually most of it is around, getting the right business questions so that you can delve into topics that are of business value. And that taught me a lot in those early days. That's 2011, 2012, 2013. And when we started looking more generally at companies, when I started being an external consultant and advisor, it struck me that one of the biggest challenges in HR is the level of analytical know-how, generally. But when you break that down, there are a number of skill areas, and the two that are really lacking most that we found was, one is why even look at data as opposed to other forms of insight. Why even look at data? And the other was, how to put that information across to people. So the storytelling and visualization piece, getting your point across is what we call it. And a lot of this came down to early research that I did in 2015-16 in the book, The Power of People, where we analyzed, a purposeful methodology for analytics, which basically starts with, framing business questions, building hypotheses. And then you go on to the more well-known areas like, gather data, reveal insights, determine recommendations, etc. And what we found is that generally HR professionals are very comfortable asking for data and asking for more data, and then asking for a bit more data, and then asking for more data. And what we found was that actually asking why you're asking for that data was a lesser form technique, but the skills around it, which are open questioning, paraphrasing, consulting skills, are actually skills that most HR professionals have learned really early in their career for other reasons around counselling, being a sounding board advisor and things like that, generally in the HR profession. So what we worked at is if you really want to build a data-driven culture in HR, you don't have to build statistical experiences and skills deep into the HR organization. What we do need to do is bring almost consulting analytical skills to the fore. So what are the problems? Why would a data approach help resolve that problem, and how would it allow you to think about what is the data that is needed to best solve those problems, and linking those problems, those people problems, to business topics. So if there's a big digitization program going on in an organization, what are the people behaviors needed to best help that digital transformation? As opposed to just asking for questions about, what's the attrition rate, how many performance approvals, who's done this course, how quick are we recruiting and things like that. But actually saying, I was actually on a call with a chief people officer only a few hours ago prior to this recording. And that organization is looking at a massive transformation, a physical transformation. It's a telecoms organization, moving from copper lines to fiber lines. That's a big capital investment. But alongside that, there's a digital transformation, and there's a behavioral and cultural transformation as well. So when you do that, the HR business team needs to move from being that sort of more traditional counselor type role into that digital transformation, business transformation partner. And the questions then are, what are the behaviors needed in that new organization? What's the right culture for that new organization? How do we change skills from, skill A to skill B? Because the differences are quite dramatic. How do we do that while preserving the right business balance sheet and moving, massive capital expenditure to future operational efficiency? So there's big business topics in there, but you have to sort of go behind that. And I think those are the skills that most business people most HR people are requiring to link to that business topic. So in summary, why? Big transformations in businesses require different behaviors, different skill sets, and different workforces. What is needed? An understanding of how digital and data techniques are more grounded in good business questions and framing great understanding of what is needed to move the business forward, rather than just asking for data.
Yeah, very good. And it's interesting, the World Economic Forum's Future of Jobs report was published a few weeks ago, and the number one skill now required in demand, I think it was 11,000 companies that they surveyed as part of this, is analytical thinking. So it's not just HR, it's other business functions as well. And certainly since we started the company in Insight 222 back in 2017, it's one of the biggest challenges that people analytics leaders came to us then. And it's still one of the biggest challenges that people analytics leaders and chief people officers come to us now. And Naomi, you led some research around this, on what companies that are doing this well are doing in terms of building data in their HR functions. What should chief people officers and HR professionals focus on?
Yeah, David. So I think before we get into the skills, and Jonathan's touched on most of those already, the other thing to say is that role modelling is really important. So I think this is one of the biggest findings that came out of our research on this topic, is that without role modelling, then a programme of data literacy isn't necessarily going to be successful. So what we found is that in organisations where both the Chief Human Resources Officer and the HR leadership team role modelled the use of people, data and analytics, in those companies, 79% of those companies say that HR practitioners use people, data, analytics and insights in their day-to-day jobs. But in companies where that role modelling doesn't exist, only 22% can say the same thing. So that's a really stark difference. And I think the other thing to point out here is it's not just about the CHRO. The HR leadership team have a really important role to play in this. In some cases they may be more influential, because particularly in large organizations, the CHRO is not accessible on a daily, and certainly not daily, but maybe not even weekly basis to the rest of the HR function, but they do have line of sight to their HR leadership team member, and they do look to that person as their leader. So it's really important that person is role modeling these behaviors and leading this change. Then, of course, we get into the skills that they need to develop. Jonathan's mentioned some of these already. And again, to emphasize that some of these aren't new skills. They're skills that certainly HR business partners and HR COE specialists, would potentially have already. But really the collective that forms around, data-driven capability, it's making actionable recommendations from insights, it's managing stakeholder relationships with the business, it's been able to consult with business leaders to, get behind. What that means is getting to the question behind the question, and then using that to frame questions for analytics to answer and build hypotheses, interpreting insights from data reports and dashboards. It's not just about pulling out data points, but what does that data mean? What's the insight? And then, of course, really important storytelling, telling stories using data. They're the really key things there.
That's brilliant. And I'm sure many people listening to this episode, might be an HR leader thinking about an upskilling program. That research, we'll put that in the show notes as well. So building data literacy in HR. We also have a lot of people analytics leaders and professionals listening as well, Naomi. So based on the research and your own experience, obviously, from being a people analytics leader, what type of what do these trends mean for people analytics professionals? What's their role in this process?
Yeah, so people analytics leaders and their teams have a really important role in this. So another thing we found in our research, it's a great report, so I do recommend that people download it. It's a really useful asset. We found that programs of upskilling are most likely to be effective when the people analytics leader is leading them. Now, they may not be the only person leading them. They might be part of a partnership with learning, but the people analytics leader needs to be part of that spearheading of that program. And we also found that when the people analytics leader is, the level of investment that's secured, the importance that's attached to a program of upskilling, it's much more likely to be in place. But there's skills involved in this as well for people analytics leaders. That there's an expectation on a people analytics leader to have executive impact, and really be able to deliver change. I mean, we're talking about cultural change programs. This is what this is, and those are really complex to land and have a lasting impact. So we found that people analytics leaders, they need for this, and of course other things as well. They need storytelling skills, they need consulting. Influencing is really important. They need to be able to influence their peers, that this is important, and that for investment as well. They need to have the organisational acumen, understand across the HR function how this is going to impact different populations, what their own challenges are, and things like that. And then change management as well. Change management is really big. And it's similar for the people analytics team as well. This is really where change management is significant. I think my advice to people analytics leaders and teams is do not underestimate the change management that's required, in an endeavour like this. And for people analytics, that applies not just to data literacy programs. It also applies to what we were talking about earlier in terms of rolling out people analytics products and driving that adoption as well.
So Jonathan, again, I know obviously we work with lots of organisations, HR leadership teams, HR professionals, HR business partners that kind of help them acquire these skills and use them practically. And you've delivered a lot of those, or you've led a lot of those initiatives as well. So from your experience, what have you found to be the most effective ways for HR and people analytics professionals to upskill?
Well, adding to what Naomi just said, one of the first things is making sure that you've got the right leadership in managing an upskilling program. And that means having the chief human resource officer sponsoring and leading from the front. It means having the HR leadership team involved in some level of education, education around upskilling their own skills, but also education around role modeling, data, the use of data across the organization. And then there are, I would say, two other levels that are important. There's a level of knowledge that shall we call them client-facing HR business professionals need. So HR business partners, COE, HR managers, directors. Typically, we're looking at consulting skills and visualization, storytelling, stakeholder skills that Naomi just outlined. But there's that level of education, and it's quite it's not a quick fix. This is not a 1 hour digital program. This is a multi-hour over a multiple weeks program of learning and iterating, using case studies and simulations and things like that. That's a really good way. It's got to be done in a very complete way. And then underneath that is a different tier of people. It's more about data language, data, core data literacy. Is the organization speaking the same language? Are we all talking about the same things? And there might be some tools and processes that have to be put in place as well for that. But I think it's sponsorship and leadership, tier one, right at the top tier, HR leadership team, skills and role modeling. I think it's a client-facing team, deep, long period, complete education, and then there's the sort of thinner but very extensive layer of upskilling around data languages, data literacy, and things like that. But I think you wrap it around. It's a program where we've seen this work really, really well in organizations. Is where it's over a multi-quarter period. This is not. We've seen organizations, cram learning into 1 year. It's like the initiative of the year, and then it sort of drops off, and something else comes in. And this is the classic little and often approach. Do a bit more, but keep it going. Maybe over a 2 to 3 year period, and over that time, the general level of data literacy and therefore impact with analytics raises in the organization overall.
I suspect when we do another podcast in a few years' time, this will still be a topic that many HR functions are struggling with. And again, maybe a catalyst for companies to invest more in this is the need to be AI literate as well as data literate, because obviously data literacy is a key part of that. We're moving towards the end of the conversation. We've got a couple more questions. So I think really listening to the both of you and knowing the work that we're doing at Insight 222 and the conversations that I've had on the podcast, but also with clients of the Insight 222 People Analytics program, it's not, People Analytics isn't just about the insights you uncover, it's about the outcomes you deliver. I think you talked, Jonathan, the shift from kind of activities to outcomes earlier in the conversation. And that's exactly what we're working on at the moment in our next book, The Value of People Analytics, which will really go in deep to explore how to deliver business value from people analytics with examples from leading companies. Jonathan, is there anything you'd like to add so that maybe get listeners excited about the book? Then I think, Naomi, you've got a question. You're going to put us on the spot as well.
Thank you, David. I can see behind you on your shelf, you've got Excellence in People Analytics there, which is the book that was published in 2021. You've even got the Italian and Korean versions there, which is very nice. When we were writing that book, which was predominantly written in 2020 during the year of the year that the pandemic started, that was the seminal year. That was the year that People Analytics rose dramatically, in importance, and the CHRO rose dramatically in importance. And what we have discovered since then, I guess, through all of our research and our interactions with companies, all the three of us, we interact with collectively probably 400 companies a year, something like that, through our research, through our deep, client interactions and so on, is that many companies are doing a lot now, a lot more than they did pre-2020, a lot more than before the pandemic. But what we're finding is some companies that delivers value, and some companies is delivering activity. And what we're trying to do, as David, as you're pointing to, is, what is it that organizations do when they actually deliver value? And we talked a bit about that before in leading companies in people analytics. And so, we've got a new book coming out. I mean, hopefully by the time that this podcast is on the shelf, shall we say, out there and the platforms, we'll have maybe given a little bit more insight into what that is. But the book is called The Value of People Analytics. We're taking a similar approach to how we wrote the other book, part theory, part case studies, what we found in the Excellence in People Analytics book. And actually what I found in Power of People back in 2017 when working with Nigel and Sherry was that case studies bring it alive, but case studies alone don't help because there needs to be structures and formats that can help people scale. So the book is about value of people analytics. It really talks about outcomes. It talks about it's not what you do, it's about what you deliver with what you do. And if that's the strap line, I don't know whether that will be the strap line, but that is what it's about. It's not about what you do in analytics. It's about what you deliver with what you do in analytics that's important. So we'll explore these 8 characteristics of leading companies in people analytics. We'll explore value where it's delivered. That's workforce value, value in analytics, building an analytical culture in HR. It's value as measured by financial outcomes, and it's value in society. Companies, working communities. What is that societal value? Very exciting. I mean, it's we're in the middle of writing now, or just started. I mean, we'll probably be finished in the late spring, and then it will be on the shelves hopefully in, I don't know. Kogan Page tell us hoping it to be in the shelves in October of 2025. So that's a very exciting point, and let's see if it excites as much as we're excited about it.
Jonathan, will people be able to pre-order the book?
I hope so. I mean, yes, as you get closer to the day, Kogan Page, our publishers, who've been brilliant in excellence in people analytics, there's a pre-publication, pre-ordering system that will come on, as the book gets closer to publication day. Yes, and we'll have on the Insight 222 website, we'll have a landing page soon where people can register their interest, and then we can push them towards pre-ordering as well. But the excitement around it will be more, and hopefully Naomi as well will do a little bit more on the launching as well as we get closer. I know you were involved last time, Naomi, and we're very grateful for that, and you're involved this time as well, which you're super excited about. But last time, as you remember, we couldn't really launch it like as people launch books because we were in the middle of the pandemic. So we could only do 1 or 2. We weren't even allowed to travel for a number of months, so we couldn't even physically launch it in other countries. But hopefully we'll have those activities in fourth quarter and probably for about a 6-month period or so, hopefully. Around the world, hopefully. If who knows? Let's see how excited we get.
So, last question, and this is, I'm going to ask you both to look into your crystal balls a little bit here. If we think about people analytics, and we've travelled a lot in 5 years, I think, as you talked about there, both of you. What do you see as the next frontier for people analytics in the next 5 years? What will we be talking about in 2030? So, Jonathan, I'll let you go first.
It's a really, really active area. We have seen people analytics grow about 40% in pure volumes of just people in the companies that we survey since 2020 to 2024, so in those 5 years, from the early days back in 2010 that I was involved, it's grown immeasurably. So firstly, a very, very poor and very uninteresting fact is that I think in the next 10 years or so, people analytics will grow tremendously more, but it will be more aggregated across the HR organization, and data literacy will go up. I think what my prediction is that in 10 years' time, I know, David, you talk of 5 to 10 years, but in 10 years' time, because often business, although we like to think business moves rapidly, often trends move slightly slower. But I see that in 10 years' time, people analytics cases around improving financial value and business strategic value will be mainstream in business nomenclature. I think that's what happened in 10 years. In 5 years, I think AI, in our more modern way of looking at AI, will be an infused and integral part of analytics and human resources, such that we won't really be talking about them as specific things. So it'll just be, we have a ... tool that does, ABC. We have like the Schneider Electric example I gave earlier, we have a fair pay simulator that helps us align our compensation planning with our strategic pay equity goals. And underneath is analytics and AI. But no one will talk about that. They'll just talk about the fact that there's a fair pay simulator, or there might be a, you mentioned the IBM example of Hero and the performance promotion planning tool application system. And we'll just talk about it as a process, as a system, so that, the analytics, the advanced analytics and the AI is integral and part of it. And I think in 5 years' time, we won't be talking about those as, has it got analytics? Has it got AI? It's like, that's just normal, we'll talk about applications and process improvements, and everything will be infused with analytics, and everything will be infused with generative AI technology as normal. I think that's what will happen in 5 years. And then, but my excitement is more the 10-year goal, that a CEO will just be talking naturally about people, topics, and it's all infused and led by data.
Naomi?
Yeah, so David, I think that there's so much change and disruption in the world at the moment. It really has been for the last 5 years, the geopolitical situation, climate change, technological advances, and I don't see in the next 5 years any of that changing. And we know that that's all disrupting the world of work as well. So people topics like culture and talent, they're going to continue to be board topics. And that's always going to mean a focus there for people analytics. And I think it's well documented and talked about, David, in many of your podcast interviews you've had recently, that the war for talent is in fact a war for skills. And of course, alongside this, AI is changing jobs as well. And we're really only, early on in understanding what that's going to be and all of the complexities that come with that. So the shape of the workforce and the skills that are in demand, they may not even exist in the marketplace, but organizations have got to figure out that skills challenge. And of course, that's a board topic as well. So I think people analytics has a huge role to play in driving the organisation forward in the right direction. And I think that the work it does is really going to be shaped by these forces even more so than it is already.
Yeah, and I'll just chuck one in. I think with technology and demographics going the way they are, I think in 5 years' time, we will have proved beyond doubt, I'm going to be brave on this, beyond doubt, that investing in employee well-being actually has a positive impact on business results. And maybe that's more of a wish than a prediction, but let's hope so. Jonathan, Naomi, thank you so much for joining me on the Digital HR podcast today. Last question for both of you. How can listeners stay in touch with you and find out more about all the great work we do at Insight 222. Naomi, I'll start with you, and then Jonathan, you can have the final word.
Yeah, so listeners can follow me on LinkedIn. I like to share lots there about the research that we're publishing and the events that we're delivering. So please go and follow me there. Also encourage you to go to the Insight 222 website into what we do and into our research, and you can download many of the reports that we've talked about. I know, David, you're going to share some of the resources, and also the myHRfuture blog as well is a great resource. We post a lot about what we're doing there as well. So yeah, those are the main ways.
Thank you. And Jonathan?
Yeah, I mean, similar to Naomi, all those things, but just please connect with me on LinkedIn. That's the easiest. I think I'm the only Jonathan Ferrar on LinkedIn. There aren't too many of us with this name in the world, so I look forward to accepting those invitations and connecting with people. And you can get hold of me via LinkedIn or just jonathan.ferrar@insight222.com. I mean, just send me an email. Like to connect with people all over the world and meet at conferences and events.
Yeah, and I usually say to guests at the end, I look forward to seeing you at an upcoming event, but I kind of get to do that anyway. Naomi, we'll see each other in Paris next week because L'Oreal are kindly hosting us at a peer meeting. So thank you both for being guests on the show. And yeah, enjoy the rest of your day and have a good weekend.
Thanks, David. Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
In this series, we will be speaking to a range of senior leaders who are pushing a data-driven and digital HR agenda. Make sure that you subscribe via your podcast app of choice and also via our YouTube channel for free and regular interviews with the digital HR leaders of the future.